Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for another video. This one's going to be about section 8.5, which is about the Western countries after World War I. And we're really looking at just a couple of major issues right now. Number one is we're going to look at some culture and how culture changes over the results of the First World War. And then we're going to look at politically what's going on in the Western developed industrial, especially European and the United States countries following World War I. So the first thing we have to start off with, of course, is World War I is enormously destructive to Europe, and it's enormously expensive for Europe too. Since the beginning of our class, we've really noticed that cultural trends have tended to start in Europe, and then Europe has been the trendsetter because that's really where a lot of the wealth and money and power was from things like the Industrial Revolution and the Agricultural Revolution and the Scientific Revolution, the Age of Exploration. All those sorts of things made Europe into a really super important and powerful place. The problem, of course, is after World War I, Europe is broke and broke in as well. And so one country more than any other came out of World War I in a really good position, and that, of course, was the United States for a couple of reasons. Number one, the war did not happen in the United States, and number two, of course, is we were only really involved in the war very, very late in the going, right? We only really got involved in the spring and summer of 1918, and the war was over in November, so really we weren't there very long. But we were the ones that had a lot of the ability to produce products that other people needed to buy, and so that gave us a huge amount of wealth and a huge amount of importance, and also then a huge amount of cultural power. And so after World War I, what we see is that culture starts to shift from Europe to the United States. And one of the great examples of that is what we're looking at right here. A guy named Louis Armstrong, who represents this shift to the American culture as being the dominant culture in the world. And of course, Louis Armstrong is representative of the new style of music, which is called jazz. Now, jazz is really interesting because, of course, it comes from the United States. It comes from black culture in the United States. And one of the big components that makes jazz is you're supposed to break the rules. You're not necessarily supposed to follow the same time signature. You're supposed to just kind of play what you feel. It's supposed to be emotive music that really represents the feelings of people. And the feelings that most people had after World War I was, let's have a party. Let's not take anything too seriously because, of course, we've just been through the First World War, the Great War, as they called it, of course. And let's just enjoy life and have fun and not worry about anything because, that was so horrible and awful of an experience that we just want to make sure that we're going to move on to something happier and something better. So that's one big shift, of course, is to the United States as the center of culture and of music in particular. However, back in Europe, we do see a couple of other big things come out when it comes to culture and intellectual history as well. Some of these we've done already, some of these haven't. Of course, Sigmund Freud, after World War I, people really start to latch on to Sigmund Freud because, of course, when we talked about him before, in 1899, he published his personality theory, which was the id, ego, and superego, where the id is the animal part of your mind, the superego is the society part of your mind, and the ego is the decider between the two of the other ones, and they're always trying to create, a balance is what makes you a normal person, according to Freud. Well, in World War I, or before World War I, people thought that they had gotten rid of the id and there was no more id anymore, and their superegos were so strong that they could be perfectly good people all the time. And then they got into World War I and realized that that wasn't really true, that there was definitely an id in everybody and that it was just waiting to come out, and the war, of course, helped to make that happen. So after World War I, Freud becomes enormously popular, he becomes enormously important, and people really start to dig down into his theories to try to apply that, not only just to understand, but also to help World War I soldiers to deal with the kind of emotional and psychological trauma that they had experienced in the war. So there we start developing a new personality theory as a result of World War I. Other intellectual developments. Marie and Pierre Curie, both were instrumental in researching radioactivity, which had only been discovered in the 19th century. They did a huge amount of experiments on radium and really understanding how radioactivity could work. She won 2 Nobel Prizes for her work Really what she did was she paved the way for modern medicine and modern understandings of physics and things like that. The sad part, though, is because she was the first person to really understand and research radioactivity, it also gave her radiology poisoning and killed her eventually, which is really, really kind of a sad thing, but also very instrumental and important in understanding the world and medicine as we've got it today. 1916, Freud published his theory of general relativity. We talked about special relativity before and things like the speed of light and how space and time are intricately connected. If you guys remember the twin experiment that I told you about before, if we put two twins, leave one of them on Earth and shoot another one of them in a rocket towards Vega and back. When the kid gets back in the rocket, he's 8 years old, and his brother who stayed back on Earth is 80 years old. Again, that really throws people for a loop, and it's very difficult for most people to understand how that could possibly be, and it really violates our intuitions about the world. But ultimately, after World War I, Einstein really gets the credit that he deserves, which is that he changes the understanding that we've got of the fundamental nature of the universe. And of course, people after World War I are okay with questioning the old ways now. It's not so much the age of anxiety. Now it's the age of, well, let's not get too serious about anything. The next intellectual discovery we get is in 1934. An Italian scientist named Enrico Fermi started to theorize that it would be possible to take an atom and to take the nucleus of an atom and to split it apart. And if that were to happen, if that fission were to happen, it would release a humongous amount of the energy that was holding that atom together and that nucleus together. And so Fermi's the guy who really theorizes the process of nuclear fission, which would one day give us things like energy and electricity, but also, of course, give us the atomic bomb. So that's going to be a really important thing later. The next one, of course, is 1928. We get a Scottish researcher named Alexander Fleming. Fleming was a biologist who was doing some studies with growing different kinds of mold and things in petri dishes in his laboratory. He left the petri dishes in his refrigerator and then went on vacation for a couple of weeks, and his refrigerator broke. So when he got back, everything was covered in mold. And while you and I might have been tempted to just throw that stuff away and think, oh, gross, this is disgusting, he actually looked very carefully at them and realized that one of the molds that was growing in his petri dishes prevented the development of bacterial cultures from growing, and he realized that that particular mold was called penicillin, and he said, well, what happens if we give this to people? Would that help to treat their illnesses? And of course, with the discovery of penicillin, we now have antibiotics, and we've got all kinds of new medicines that allow us to fight off infections, which again, we didn't have until 1928 when Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. So if you really want to understand one of the major differences between our current outbreak of COVID-19 and the 1918 and 1919 Spanish flu, I mean, you're talking about the Spanish flu happening 10 years before we'd even discovered penicillin. That's why that was such a destructive outbreak, and why hopefully this one's going to be a lot less so, is because, you know, we have a lot more understanding of the world and how to deal with it and how to treat things like this. Now, moving from the purely intellectual understandings that come out after World War I, we should also move into art as well. And one of the things about modern art is we see competing styles. We don't see singular dominant styles over the course of time in the 20th century. We really see, and we just refer simply to this new movement as modern art that has lots and lots of different facets. So one of the people that really creates modern art is a Spanish artist named Pablo Picasso. Now, Picasso was famous for doing a couple of things, and the things he was really famous for doing was breaking the rules that we've been establishing since the very beginning of this class. One of the first rules that Picasso breaks, he breaks with this painting, which is called La Demoiselle d'Avignon, which he paints in 1907. The rule that he decided to break here in this particular painting was the rule that art had to be beautiful. He said, I can paint something which is ugly on purpose, and ultimately it's still going to be art, and it's still going to be something that is worth exploring and enjoying. After he breaks the rule about beauty, Picasso also goes all the way back to the Italian Renaissance, where we started our class in January, and he starts breaking the one rule that had always been true in art, which was perspective. Picasso starts to develop a style which is called cubism, and the idea behind cubism is we no longer want the Italian Renaissance's idea of linear perspective. Picasso said, I don't want to see a figure from one point of view. I want to see it from all point of views at the same time. I want to paint a face that I'm looking at from the front, from the side, from above, from underneath, from all different angles. I'm trying to capture that all at the same time in the exact same painting. And so Picasso's work in cubism really starts to challenge what it means to be modern art, right? It's not necessarily that he's designing realistic pictures anymore, or realistic paintings anymore. He's doing things which really represent his perspectives on the world, and cubism becomes a major dominant style in that particular way. We also get another competing style from a guy named Vasily Kandinsky. Kandinsky starts to question another rule of art, which was that you had to make paintings or pictures or art about something. He questioned the rule called subject. What is the subject of this particular painting? This is called writer. He paints this in 1910, and writer means rider. It's a man riding a horse, but of course it's more of an abstract idea of a man riding a horse, and really the movement that Kandinsky becomes famous for starting is called abstract art. Kandinsky says, I'm going to paint art, but I'm not going to paint art of something. I'm just going to paint art. It's going to be art without a subject. And so this one here is called Composition 7. He paints this in 1913. This one is called On White 2, 1923. And again, all of these have no subject matter. It's art just to express the art itself. This one's called Composition 10. This one was painted in 1939. I tend to think of this one as being kind of a party painting. I'm not really sure why. He wasn't painting a party. It's just that's kind of what I read into it. And really that's the important part about abstract art, is that it's not about what the author meant or the artist meant to convey to you. It's about what you can read into the painting because it's abstract. You see what you want to see. And so it's much more about the subjective experience of art than it is about painting art of something. The next style we're going to get is from a man named Jean Arp, who we're looking at here. Arp started a school of art which is called the Dada movement, or it's sometimes called Dadaism. He is really the first person responding to World War I, in which he wants to have pieces of art that represent the loss of truth and certainty, and to make his audience feel shocked and disturbed to a very large extent. And that's what Dada is all about. So Jean Arp is always going to try to give you that kind of feeling of discomfort and unease, and like, I'm just really not entirely sure about this. That's the feeling that he's always going for. So this one is a composition from 1921, which is called Shirt and Fork. And most people are okay with the fork part, but the shirt part, most people look at that and go, yeah, I see tooth, right? That's what most people will tell you, is I see tooth. I don't see shirt, that discomfort, that not quite so comforting sort of way of presentation is what he's going for. This one's from 1939. This one's called Growth, which is kind of weird and creepy and goopy, but that's a Dadaism, and that's Jean Arp. This one's from 1953. This one's called Clouds. Again, not really sure what you're going to take from that, but that's Jean Arp's Dada impression of clouds from 1953. This one's called Torso of a Giant from 1957. So again, we're looking at this idea of kind of pushing the boundaries of art and getting into things which are less classically striving for this kind of idea of perfection, and much more towards the subjective experience of what art's going to be. Last guy we're going to do is another Spanish artist named Salvadore Dali. Dali was famous for a new movement of art called surrealism. And in surrealism, really what he was doing was he was taking Sigmund Freud's idea of the subconscious mind, and he wanted to understand what would the subconscious mind know and understand about the world around us. How would the subconscious paint, essentially, is the idea that Salvadore Dali is going for. So we get a lot of very strange, peculiar things because, of course, the subconscious doesn't directly interact with the world around it. So it's got this kind of strange, warped, almost confusing view of reality. This is probably Dali's most famous painting. It is called The Persistence of Memory. He paints this in 1931. Here we see the Temptation of St. Anthony. So Salvadore Dali, of course, is more than willing to do classically religious paintings, but he does it in this very skewed and almost abstract, although it's not really abstract because there is subject matter here. It's a very peculiar way. Here we see a very classical subject matter, which is the crucifixion of Jesus. This is called Crucifixion from 1954, but here instead of crucifying Jesus on a two-dimensional cross, Dali has crucified him on a four-dimensional cross. Right? So instead of it existing in three-dimensional space, it exists in four-dimensional space, which makes you think, how can it be four-dimensional? Well, that's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to show you this kind of otherworldliness, right? So that's kind of modern art in and of itself. The last thing we have to do with this video, which is already getting a little bit long, is we have to look at politically what's going on in the Western world. Well, one of the things we see is after World War I, in the United Kingdom, we get the creation of the modern two-party system that we see in Britain. The first party that rises to prominence in the 1920s is called the Labour Party. And the Labour Party, by and large, is a gradualist movement towards a socialist state. They want the government to take control of the means of production, which of course is factories and trains and mines and things like that. The government should be in charge of that and should ensure equal distribution of resources. That's what the original Labour Party in the 1920s was all about. After World War I, people find that very appealing and in very large numbers. Working class people especially starts to push for the rise of the labor movement. But of course, with labor, we also see the response from the middle class and upper class British people who vote for the Conservative, or what we call the Tory party. Beyond the modern two-party system, we also see another movement in nationalism within the British Empire, but this one's actually going to be on the British Islands themselves. In 1914, Parliament passed a bill that said that they supported Irish home rule. Now, if you remember Ireland, the last time we talked about Ireland was in the 1840s potato famine, when British landowners really didn't care all that much about the Irish, and when the potato blight hit, it really devastated Ireland to a very large extent. Well, a lot of Irish people at that point started thinking about maybe we should have Ireland for the Irish people. In 1914, the British were worried that the Irish would start a rebellion right at the beginning of World War I, and so they decided to make a bill that said we support Irish home rule, but not right now. In May of 1916, though, Irish rebels decided that they were going to declare independence right around Easter, and this is sometimes referred to as the Easter Rising. The British sent World War I veterans over to Dublin to forcibly retake Ireland back and to prevent the rebels from having independence in 1916, and to try to put this discussion off until after World War I. In 1919, Irish people themselves formed themselves together into a group called the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, right? So right at the end of World War I, they decided to start guerrilla warfare against the British government to try to get them out of Britain. In 1922, Ireland decided that they were going to have a vote, and they were going to vote per county over whether they wanted to join the new Republic of Ireland or whether they wanted to remain part of the British Empire. And the way the vote split was the northern 7 counties on the island of Ireland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom because mostly the people who lived there were Protestants, and they wanted to stay part of the Protestant country of the United Kingdom. The other countries, as you can see here, formed the modern Republic of Ireland, which was predominantly Catholic. Now, this also creates a problem because if you're an Irish nationalist, this isn't going to be okay because you've divided Ireland up into 2 pieces. Irish Protestants, though, were worried about living in a majority Catholic country, and so this division was not very popular. And of course, later on in the later 20th century, after World War II, we'll see how this leads to a period of time that we call the Troubles. But that's where we're going to leave that for right now, is that Ireland gets its independence, but the island itself is split. Next, what we've got to do is we've got to hit the country of France. Of course, we know that France, after World War I, wanted to punish Germany, and they did with the Treaty of Versailles. They were entitled to get humongous amounts of money from Germany in the form of reparations, and really it's this fear of Germany, because remember, Germany and France have been going back and forth after each other. for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so the French decided that they were going to use their reparations money to construct an impregnable line of defenses called the Maginot Line, which is Maginot. They said, we're going to build these defenses right on the border between France and Germany will never be able to get aggressive and to invade us again. So here you can see kind of a cutaway of a mountain. And inside this mountain, you've got tunnels, you've got barracks, you've got bunkers, you've got artillery emplacements, you've got pillboxes, which are reinforced concrete bunkers that you can shoot at or shoot from and keep your soldiers safe while you're keeping the Germans out. This is another view kind of from the side of a hollowed out mountain with lots and lots and lots of defenses. Some of these defenses are actually still there and you can still go and see them. So this is an observation post right on the border between France and Germany. This is an artillery emplacement underneath that big concrete dome. This was supposed to be designed so that France would be safe from German aggression forever and ever and ever. Now, hopefully, even though most of you guys don't have any military experience, you'll be able to figure out what the problem was with the Maginot Line. If we look at the Maginot Line, the fortresses themselves really are impregnable. The problem, though, is the French only really build the Maginot Line along the border with Germany. So while the German army isn't going to be able to invade France directly, if you'll notice, the French kind of left the side door open, and so all the Germans have to do is to cut through Belgium and Luxembourg to be able to invade France. Now, why would anybody ever expect them to do that? Of course, hopefully you guys remember that in World War I, the von Schlieffen plan, the Germans did exactly that. So really, the Germans could use their old playbook to invade France and make that entire investment of like $28 billion completely and totally useless, because all the guns on the Maginot Line point towards Germany. If the German army comes around the other side and attacks the Maginot Line from behind, there's nothing the French army is going to be able to do with that, and wouldn't you know it, that's pretty much just what we're going to see in World War II. Now, the other big issue that we've got when it comes to politics after World War I is the idea of the League of Nations. Of course, the League of Nations was the idea of President Wilson from the 14 Points Plan. And the issue, though, becomes when President Wilson brings that Treaty of Versailles back to the United States Senate for approval, the Senate says we don't want to get involved in the League of Nations. And so here you can see, right, this League of Nations bridge was designed by the President of the United States, but the middle, the keystone, the thing that holds it all together, the United States itself, never joins. In addition to that, the League of Nations has no military of its own. It's also pretty much always broke, which means they can't really do a lot. They can encourage you not to fight, they can encourage you not to go to war, but if you decide to do it anyway, the only thing they can really do is to send you a letter that says we're really disappointed in the fact that you're risking war again. And really this comes from an idea called idealism, which is the idea that says that if only we can set up the perfect system, the world will never have to have a war again. That idea was so strong after the Great War that in 1929 people actually signed this document, which was called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which said that all the countries on this list are forever and always giving up their power and their right to use war as a political vehicle of getting what they want. The United States signs it, the British sign it, the Italians sign it, the Emperor of India signs it, of course, who's the King of England, signs it, the Emperor of Japan signs it, Poland signs it, Czechoslovakia signs it, lots and lots and lots and lots of people sign it. But, of course, the problem becomes, after 1929, things get kind of real kind of quick, because, of course, we run into this situation called the Great Depression, where the stock market collapses, the economy collapses, people get fired, they don't have money, they can't spend money, which means businesses close, which means they fire even more workers, which means even more people don't have money. And so things got really, really, really bad for a period of several years, and this is across the entire world. Now, one of the places that got particularly bad was in Germany. So here what we can see in Germany is the value of a paper Reichsmark, which is, we can think of it as a dollar, versus a gold Reichsmark. Now, gold marks didn't change their value. Paper marks did. And what you can see here is through the course of the 1920s, they hit a period called hyperinflation, where their money really started to lose value to the point where instead of having one paper mark equaling one gold mark, it got to the point where it cost 1 trillion paper marks to get the value of one gold mark. People at the time, Germans at the time, said, well, I can't use my money to buy things like fuel to run my furnace, so instead I'm just going to burn my money. Here you see a guy, this is a very famous photograph of a guy who went to the bank to get a week's worth of grocery money that he had to carry to the grocery store in a wheelbarrow. Now the story goes that on his way to the grocery store, he got robbed, but the thief stole his wheelbarrow because the wheelbarrow had money, and he left behind the huge stacks of money because the wheelbarrow was worth more than the money that it contained. Right? Here we also see German children playing with billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of Reichsmarks as toy blocks right out on the open street, because if anybody stole it, who cared? It wasn't like you lost anything of value because the money was essentially valueless. We see throughout the world 20, 30, 40% unemployment in different places. The economies collapse, trade collapses, everything's bad, and we know what happens when things go bad. When things go bad, people want big changes. They want big, big, big opportunities for themselves to be safe and secure forever. And so that's what we're going to get into in the next 3 videos. We're going to look at the rise of fascism in Italy, the rise of Stalinism in the Soviet Union, and the rise of Nazism in Germany. And those 3 units are the last 3 bridges, the last 3 pieces that we need to set ourselves up for the beginning of World War II, which is topic 9. So I hope that this video was good for you, even if it's a little bit long. I will see you guys in the next one. Stay healthy, stay safe, and let me know if you guys have any questions.